Welcome to the inner world of filmmaking. I'm your host, Tammy McGarrow. I'm an editor, podcaster, and still photographer. In this show, I will interview filmmakers in all facets of production and distribution. Today we have Emmy-nominated producer for Autism and Love, Carolina Groppa, and she's going to discuss the world of the producer. Welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me. It's a treat to be here.
I am so excited to talk about what a producer does because I think that there's a lot of probably misconceptions of what they do. And a lot of times people think, oh, they just get the money, which is not always true. So, So I thought maybe what we could do is we could just start with how did you get into producing, get into the film world and then decide I want to be a producer?
Yeah, I'd love to, before I jump into that, just for my own fun and curiosity, hear what are some of the misconceptions you've heard about producers and what you think like the producer title means, when that word comes to you, like what comes up for you?
Well, I always think the producer is in charge of getting the money. So that's a big thing, which I don't believe that's always what they do. And then also the elusiveness of just really what exactly, there's so many, the line producer, the executive producer, the producer, production manager, is that part of the producing team? And, it's like, where is the line? The other thing I want to know is like, how does somebody, step into being a producer? But I'm kind of jumping ahead, but that's immediately what I thought is like, okay, well, when all of us or a lot of us start in film, sometimes we start as PAs, right? We start at the bottom. We get on film shoot or we figure out where we want to go. But producers, I'm thinking, aren't always on set. They're probably in a production office. And maybe they occasionally come in, but that could be a misconception too. Maybe they're on set all the time.
Yeah,
so
it's all of it is true and untrue all at once. It's what makes it so convoluted and this nebulous thing. And it's why a quick pitch. I mean, I started a podcast 4 years ago called Angle on Producers for this very reason, because as I was coming up in my journey, I had a lot of questions myself for other producers, what they did, how they got there. There's no book for how to become a producer. And then the people that find success in it very rarely are interviewed, write memoirs, so you kind of never know their story. And I just became obsessed with documenting the stories predominantly of women who've come before me or who are my peers and how they've navigated that path for themselves and really talking about the realities of the path. Because I think you're right. There's so many misconceptions. And one of the big ones is that producers make all the money and have all the money. And that's quite frankly not true, not anymore. And so to really demystify what it's like to walk that path, the ups and downs of that, especially for women of color in our industry, was something that really moved me and inspired me and frankly became a place of mentorship for me. And it allowed me to become a conduit for these conversations for other people coming up under me who maybe were at the starting line of their journey, asking me the same questions that I was asking people 10 years ahead of me. And so I was like, okay, there's a missing link here of information not being shared. And so if I can help bridge that gap, like what a wonderful service to do for our community. And it's why I started Angle on Producers. And now I have over 80 episodes that I've done, truly as a labor of love, something I do completely on my own when I can, as often as I can, just again, to like educate people in our business, but also people outside of our business just on what it is, because I have spent a solid decade trying to explain to many people what I do and what is a producer and all of that jazz. So that's kind of, the intention there. But to back it up, I think producing is one of those things that if I had known what it was at a younger age, I think I would have discovered it a lot more quickly and I would have gotten on the path much more quickly. But having done these over 80 episodes, one thing I've learned is there's a DNA to the kinds of people that are drawn to the kind of work of a producer. And it's really, the producer is someone who just gets it done. And that can mean literally anything under the sun. So they thrive in the chaos. They thrive in problem solving in real time. Oftentimes, if you're on set, it's real money, real restrictions with budgets and whatnot. And you have to just come up with solutions that are creative, but that satisfy all of the odds that you're up against in real time. And that is not something that is for everyone. It's not for the faint of heart, especially, again, where you are in the sort of producer hat in that particular project, because people can have different titles or even the same titles, but be doing completely different things on different movies, because every team's alchemy is completely inherent to that team. And that's what makes the title so, again, amorphous, and it could be a catch-all for a lot of different things depending on the size of the project as well. But I started out as an actor, and that was what sort of got me in the game. I fell in love with performing. I fell in love with theater. I fell in love with going to movies, and I wanted to create those experiences that I felt as a moviegoer for others. And that's what I mean. Like, if I had known that there were other roles within filmmaking and storytelling that existed, and what that meant too, because I knew of a producer, but it just never occurred to me that was something someone could do, you know? In the same way, I think that when you're a kid, it never occurs to you that there are writers that write words that the people on screen that you love are saying. You just think those people exist somewhere, you know?
Right.
And so, yeah, I think for a long time, like many people, I thought, oh, I guess you go to Hollywood and you're either an actor, a director, or a writer. And that's kind of it. There's it never occurred to me how many more pathways there were. But that's what got me in the game. I came out to LA to pursue acting. I came to study at a conservatory, and I did that for about 3 years and had varying degrees of success. It was also a weird time. I came here right before the writer's strike of 07, 08, and then the, of course, financial crisis of 09. So that bled into 09. And so it was a tumultuous time in the business, to say the least, and in our country. But, you know, we're talking like pre-YouTube days. We're talking like black and white headshots still. It was like archaic. So opportunities to get noticed and to break in were even harder back then. So I almost moved back home after the financial crisis, because after 3 years in LA, it was really hard. It's hard for a lot of people in the beginning. And I think that's why a lot of people leave or get lost in themselves with the wrong groups of people oftentimes, and get down like a bad path, or have enough bad experiences in the beginning that they become kind of cynical versions of themselves, unfortunately. But I knew for me to sustain, I had to create my own opportunities. And I think being an immigrant, you know, I came from Brazil to America when I was 9. My family made that choice for me. I've always had this value instilled in me that I needed to make something of myself. And it wasn't my parents, like every immigrant story you hear. They weren't like, be a doctor. It was just they wanted me to follow my bliss. That's what my dad always said, follow your bliss. So I always felt like if I'm going to pursue anything, I'm going to be the best at it. And that was the pressure I put on myself, and I was going to make it happen, you know? So I started to notice that for whatever reason, producers seem to wield power in different forms. And so I was like, well, I'm going to produce something. I'm going to create an opportunity for myself. And that something became a piece of theater called Spike Heels. That's a play that existed. I got the rights to do a 6-week run in LA and got a financier and cast myself as the lead, and actors supporting me who were much better than me, much more talented. You know, and I put this show together, and I did this while working 3 part-time jobs, and just like, it was just such an insane time. But when you're in your 20s, you have a lot of energy. So I just did it somehow.
Right.
And I had such a tremendous response to that experience. Like, people loved the show. They were impressed. But a lot of people were like, wait, you put that together and you didn't really know what you were doing. Like, you should consider this, because this is an invaluable skill set that you have. Not a lot of people have that. So will you produce my short? Will you produce my fill in the blank? And so I just became the go-to person to help people put their projects together. I didn't go to film school. I didn't come out here with any contacts in the business. I never worked a desk. I never went and worked any traditional place of this business. From that moment on, I always was just in the trenches making things. And I'd say for the first couple of years, you know, I was working for free, as you do, doing shorts. Again, the producer's the first line to get cut out of anything, because it's just a sort of a flat thing. You know, it's in your best interest to deliver that thing, to make sure that it's really solid, because it can catapult you to the next phase of your career. But there was a huge chunk of time where I was just offsetting my producing school, getting experiences, shadowing producers, learning in commercials, just doing anything I could get my hands on to see how it came together, while working all these jobs and while continuing to pursue acting. And then I just kind of had a really interesting opportunity to produce a feature doc, which became Autism in Love, through very serendipitous survival job for a doctor that was an expert in the autism field and knew I was a sort of up and coming producer, and was like, would you ever want to pursue a doc with me? And I was like, yeah. And I knew enough to figure it out. It wasn't an inflated sense of ego. It wasn't the fake it till you make it, right? Which I kind of have a love-hate relationship with that saying. It feels disingenuous sometimes, and I knew I was ready for the challenge. I had learned enough that I was like, all right, I can step into this and crush it. And that was really what sort of launched me. From there on, I just kept producing everything I could get my hands on, and was fortunate to be a part of a lot of really cool projects. So I always had my own slate of things I was developing creatively to put together as a producer, while also getting hired to work as a physical producer on other people's projects. And I think it's important to make that distinction here, because I don't want people to look at my credits and think like I produced every single one of those things. I was a part of producing teams for those projects, but some of those projects had producers who had been on for years, getting the money, getting the script, at where it was going to be ready for a package and for financing, finding the cast, like doing all of the legwork so that it could get to a place where it's greenlit and ready to go into production. And oftentimes I would come in when a project was greenlit and they needed a physical producer to help them make the movie. And so I specialize being a physical producer, which often meant I'm line producing and I'm UPMing, which is a unit production manager, which is one of the pathways one can take into a union job through the DGA. And really, when it comes to producing and union jobs, because I know you were asking that off mic, that's really the only pathway currently for someone to rise the ranks and have guaranteed, health insurance if they're working, and protections, line items and budgets that cannot be touched no matter what, because a union mandates it, right? But not every person who becomes a UPM wants to necessarily be a producer. Some people just love being a part of that part of the process, which is the production part. They don't want to worry about development, finding the material, putting the cast together, finding the money, and then afterwards, post, distribution, marketing. Like, they don't want all of those responsibilities. They just like making the thing. And that's perfectly okay. And you'll start to realize when you look at credits, when UPMs start to really rise the ranks and they have a certain seniority and they're really respected and revered, they start to become producers on those projects, because they are lending a producerial lens to those projects. They are helping shape the production, which is one of the most important parts of the process, right? That's everything you get in the can during that time is the blueprint you'll have to then shape the story in your post/editing process. So I would say that's the biggest distinction. And so I spent most of my career working as a physical producer, versus oftentimes producers come up more on the creative side of things, right? They come up through a development desk. They are development execs who then maybe step into a producerial role. And there's benefits to both of those paths, I think. But for me, having come up in the trenches of production and knowing execution is now a DNA that I have. And I have 12 plus years of experience doing that across docs and feature films and branded and commercials and digital series, like across all kinds of different formats of shows, that now I can put on my creative producer hat and I actually understand how to execute those things that I'm pursuing or creating. And if I give a note, I'm already thinking about how this is going to impact how we're going to put this together on the ground, right? So I'm thinking that far ahead because I've been at that place and I can now reel it back in. And I would say the downside to those who come up only on the creative route is that oftentimes they miss that experience because there's no mandate that says, oh, for you to rise the ranks on the creative executive track, you have to have X amount of hours on set, for example. So oftentimes you have people who, rise the ranks in their career and then have never really stepped on a set for one of their projects for a variety of reasons. And so there's a certain level of sometimes the intimidation because they step on a set to oversee those projects, but they don't really know what it means if set is going well, and they're reporting to their bosses and they're like, I think everything is going fine. But they don't know the actual symphony of a set to understand, oh, no, things are actually going well, or no, things are not going well. And I've had a lot of offline over wine conversations with creative exec friends and who have shared this with me, that they wish that they had had a bit more experience on the production side of things earlier in their career, because as you rise the ranks, once you're at a VP level, you're not going to stop and go be a PA for a bit just to learn production. That's just not something you're going to do.
Right, yeah.
So anyway, that was a very long-winded answer to your question, but I think it kind of encapsulates a lot of things. So
yeah, and I was thinking that it probably takes I was thinking well, what are the qualities of a producer? Well, I would think they need to be a leader. They need to be organized
Yep.
because they have to think about a lot of different things. To be a producer, you really got to know how to. And I was also thinking, like, when you were sharing about, just stepping in and just doing it, there is something to that. I mean, sometimes I think we wait too long, or we think we have to educate ourselves so much before we can step into that role. But really stepping into the role, I think you're going to learn a lot on the fly, a lot of what you wouldn't do and what you would do. So I think there's something to just sometimes doing it.
And that's why the advice I always give people is that, unfortunately, you have to just do it to learn it. It is an apprenticeship sort of thing, There's a few books out there that give you sort of a glimpse into a producer's life, but all of that is theoretical. It's like a craft, like a technical trade even. You can read about cameras all day long, but eventually got to pick up a camera and shoot something to understand how that functions, right? And I think it's very similar with producers, because you are overseeing so much, but you're also managing a ton of people. Often on set, you're managing a lot of people who are inherently creative in a very finite amount of time to do something that is very challenging, right? You're creating art with like 300 people. So there's a lot of things that you have to navigate. So yes, you wear a lot of hats, and sometimes you're a therapist. Sometimes you have to be a bad cop. Sometimes you have to be a cheerleader. Sometimes you have to be, you have to just play so many different roles. And I think it's also why a lot of women gravitate towards the producer sort of path, because women inherently have to multitask all the time. Like, it is a stereotype, but women's brains are constantly thinking of every permutation of every problem that could exist at any second, because women have had to do that for the longest time to survive, right? So that already kind of makes you be able to scan a landscape for all the things at once and be able to go, okay, there's a million fires, but which one is like the burning the most that I should attend to, and kind of stay calm under pressure. But absolutely being a leader, but being kind, being effective, being transparent, being a good communicator, being a collaborator, I think is a mark of a good producer. I think there used to be a stereotype of a producer in the Harvey Weinstein days, right, where you're sort of berated and yelled at, and it's just this very tyrannistic way to look at the set. To me, it's like you're creating a workplace that's based on fear versus a workplace that's based on love and trust and people feeling like taken care of. And you definitely feel post-pandemic, there's been a huge shift into people really feeling like they want, you spend so many hours on set, especially for crew. Those guys go from shoot to shoot sometimes, and you want to feel like you're taken care of, that the people at the top see you for your humanity and not just for, your line item in the budget and the job that you need to do.
Right. You know what I was thinking when you said that, like the collaborative approach to producing and stuff is the fear, I think, or I don't know if it's a fear, but just editors, when they get the producer's notes, it just kind of came to mind that, but if everybody's working together as a team, then it doesn't have to be so daunting.
Yeah.
It can just be communicative. You just have to communicate, like, when you get notes sometimes.
Right. And that's the dream, but there are people that are not effective communicators who yield a lot of power. So they can communicate something in a way, or there is a lot of ego in Hollywood. Shocking, right? Groundbreaking news there. But so sometimes there are people that want to just say things for the sake of saying things, and people certainly have a reputation. And I think it's why it creates this like, oh boy, the producer's on set, or oh boy, the producer has notes, and it creates this separation. But I think I speak really specifically about the independent film scene because I've not worked in traditional big studio projects. And I would imagine that in those projects, the producer is under an insane amount of pressure because they are a liaison from the studio. So their POV is as a conduit for the studio. So they are the representative for the studio oftentimes. Whereas on the indie side, you've often come up developing that filmmaker. You are like an artist first kind of person because you've chosen to work in that space. So I think it already kind of creates a sense of collaboration that is inherent to that process, which is why even though indie film is, just on the fringes of, I don't know what's going to happen with it, it really is the most rewarding way to make art in our industry specifically, when you get it right. And it's just an incredible team of really talented humans who are all rowing in the same direction and have a shared vision, and everyone just brings in what they're really good at. And it's just this like yes and everything is just this really beautiful collaboration. And then you make art at the end of it. It's like that's what it should be like. And you get lucky sometimes. You get that lightning in a bottle experience where you got the right set of people, you have the right script, the right actors, and the movie turns out great in the edit. And it's just like, wow, short-term 12, these wonderful indie movies that go on to just open up so many hearts and launch a lot of careers for a lot of people. And that's what everyone hopes, but not everyone has that same like end path for a lot of different reasons.
Yeah, I love that approach. And that's why sometimes the studio films, as though you can make a lot more money, there's a lot more voices.
Yeah.
Than in the indie world. And then you also, producers are also in charge of the budget.
Uh-huh.
I mean, how do you learn about that? That's got to be an art in itself.
Yeah.
All those line items.
Oh, yeah. And I'm like, I love budgets. I find it so exciting. I really do. I like nerd out hardcore. But for me, like coming up, I was always doing all that things. I was like, when I was producing shorts for friends, I was doing the budget. I was helping with creative. I was figuring out posts. Like you just wore all the hats. And then you start to realize, oh, the more money you have, the more people you can hire, the more support you have, the more specialists you can have in different things. I don't have to also be locations and the caterer and everything and go get the snacks for everyone. You know what I mean? Like you can do all of the things, but when you don't have the money, everything falls to the producer. And that's why I think for people who want to start, just figuring out and starting where you're at, looking at if you want to make a short, do you have access to like a boathouse? Go shoot in a boathouse, write something about a boathouse. Don't write something that then you spend all this energy trying to find. Like make it easier for yourself and lean into what's there, but then actually play all those roles. Have to be your own, location manager for a while and do every single part of the production, because then you understand what those jobs entail to a very deep degree. But for me, like basically when I started budgeting, it was a simple Excel sheet, just like, all right, like we have $20,000 and here's how it all adds up. And you just do simple math. And then as you start to get more sophisticated, you start to learn, obviously there's softwares that are industry standard, like Movie Magic is definitely the most standard for film and TV and docs. But then on the commercial side, there's Hot Budget, which is 0.0, which is a very it's like a Excel spreadsheet on crack. I love it. It's like so intuitive and robust and does a lot of like actualizing for you. It's very cool. But you kind of just learn by doing, because you go, okay, I was given $20,000 and you think, wow, that's a lot of money. And then you break down that money and you're like, this is not enough money, right? When you start to see the cost of things, it's like anything. If I said to you, you have this budget to live on every month, and you think, okay, it gets me this far. And you start to like, once you go through 1 month, you go, oh, okay, I can't spend X amount going out for dinners. I can't buy impulsive things. I have to like bring these things. So it's kind of the same concept. You just learn by being like, we had this plan. We tried out that plan. Here's where we were successful and here's where we weren't. Okay, we went over budget by $5,000. Why? What happened? Was it just like the circumstances, or was it under budgeted to begin with? Did we always know we were going to have a permit that cost $2,000 because that's the base of what a permit costs, right? So there are these like sort of standard costs for certain things, like hard costs. And then there are just sort of, you don't know. So you have pads of what you think you're going to need. And so really it's just, for me, I had the fortune of when I did my first like big union feature, where I stepped in as a production supervisor, my first feature film. And a production supervisor is a sort of, it's a role that lives in this like purgatory, because what it is, it's like a non-union production manager. Like how I was saying, there's like a UPM who is union. A production supervisor is sort of a liaison between a line producer often and the rest of the production team. And they can do all kinds of things. It would just depends on what the person above them wants to entrust that person to do. But it's often very paperwork heavy. You're handling a lot of contracts and union documents and overseeing cost reports and all of that stuff. But I had the good fortune of having a line producer I worked with sit me down and go through every single line of the budget she made, why she did it this way, and explain to me that like, I do it this way. Another line producer could approach it in a different way. This is just how it works for my brain. And that's when you start to go, oh, okay, nothing's really standard. There's people's preferences. The only standard things are like union rates. There's basics to how you approach the process, but But ultimately, everyone has slightly different ways of doing things. And it was through that exercise, again, by just learning by doing and watching every week when cost reports would come in and she would walk me through, I budgeted this and now we're at 2 weeks into a shoot of 5 weeks and here's where we are and we're okay. But if this continues in a week, we'll be in the danger zone. We're going to have to pull money from over here. So it's a constantly like a live document, a budget during production. And it's why like you are juggling every single department's budget in your head. So when you have your camera department be like, hey, we really need that crane. And you have to go, I can't afford to give you that crane because costumes really needs this other thing that the director has said is actually more important to them. So you're constantly having to negotiate with everyone, not because you're the bad guy, but because there's a finite amount of resources and everybody needs everything all the time. It's like all the kids want the toys,
Right.
and you have to be like, okay, but we have to like get there, you know? And so you just, yeah, for me, that's how I learned. That first film was a really informative experience of how you conceive it, how it's not that scary. It feels a lot scarier until you actually see it and live it. And then I just felt really empowered to continue to learn. And, you know, within a year, I was like line producing my own stuff. And again, kind of flying by the seat of my pants. Because again, there's no one that sits with you and goes, let me teach you how to be a line producer. Let me teach you how to do this. You're just thrown in the fire. I really feel like this career path is for people who thrive in constantly being thrown into the deep end of the pool and not drowning, you know? And you get out of the pool enough times that people go, wow, you're still here and you're alive. Great. Here's another opportunity, you know?
Right.
And you rise the ranks that way. Like that's what I think it is.
Well, yeah, and I knew a producer who worked in movie magic, and she was doing the budgets, and I was looking at her, and it's really kind of cool how you know, ensure all those little things you don't think about that needs to go into the budget. Right. But also a budget is moving money. So remember that it's not like this is stuck here. If you're not using it, you move it into another section.
It's fluid.
You know?
Yeah,
so,
100%.
Right. And also, people need to remember that there's a lot of things you can get for free if you ask. Like you can go to a bar and say, hey, can we shoot there? And a lot of I went to this one bar and we were going to shoot a bar scene. And they're like, we love it. You just have to do it when we're closed.
Right.
But you can have it for free. Right. Or going to a restaurant and that they cater the meal that you're shooting in. So you just kind of got to get creative.
You have to be creative, and that's
like
where a producer comes in, right? You're constantly finding creative ways to problem solve. So it's like anything. If you're like, we have a fundraiser, we got to raise money. It's like, okay, what are all the ways you could raise money for that fundraiser? It's kind of the same mentality and same skill set, right? There's never one answer, which is the beautiful thing. Anything is possible, but that's also the daunting thing. Anything is possible. So you have to get specific so you don't get lost in all the possibilities, but also know that for every no, there's another potential yes waiting around the corner, especially when you are starting out and you're doing things like shorts or, you know, projects without a ton of money. And I think that's brilliant. Like what I would do before I even have a short or a project, I would already go to every location I think I may want and be like, hey, I'm going to be doing this project. Can I lock you in? Will you commit to this? So then you already know you have 3-4 locations locked in for a cool project. You already made those deals and you can then write to those locations. So it's not theoretical. It's not let's go find it or gee, wouldn't it be great? You already have that asset to what you're doing. And I think that's just brilliant. I think that's thrifty. I think that's smart. I applaud anyone who just like finds a way and hustles their way, and not in a gross way. I think it's really important to sustain your authenticity and your integrity also. I don't think you should like swindle people. I don't think you should lie to people. It is a very small business and word gets out. Even if you're in like Milwaukee and you think no one will ever find out, like you'd be surprised who knows who, you know? I've definitely been part of conversations where people have lost jobs from like I had this one very specific situation where when I was starting out, I was very low on the totem pole person. And this one person who was really above me was just not a kind person. And years later, I got called for whatever reason to get a reference on this person. They were like, hey, we're thinking of hiring blah, blah, blah for this project. We saw you worked with them in this project. We don't know to what capacity, but just wanted to see what they were like. And I was like, well, honestly, here was my experience of him. and that person didn't get the job because of like, how I perceived him and how this person valued my POV on this person. And maybe it confirmed some maybe feelings or gut instincts they were having about their, interview with them. So it's a small business. People say that all the time. It's all about your network, but that's why, like, everyone is, it's not stairs going up. You're not going up the proverbial ladder. I think it's more of a spiral, and every time you go up a level, you kind of start to see the same people as you go up. And so that's how you build a reputation, so that 10, 15 years into a career here, people go, oh yeah, Carolina, I've heard of her. I know of her. People I know have said good things. And that's enough. You know what I mean? That's literally enough. Like, people will call you because you're like, yeah, my friend said they liked you, so I just wanted to interview you for this job. Like, that's kind of how it works. And then, of course, you have to be able to do the job, but that is assumed once you've been hired time and time again. So,
right. Well, and also, like you said, I mean, the kinder you are to people, this is your network. I mean, as you're working with people, you're building relationships, and you're building your address book as well.
yeah.
Just like with what you said about like reaching out to places to see if you can lock them into shooting there. They're also in your address book for another time, so you're constantly building relationships. So you have to be very careful about that, because that can make or break you or make or break somebody else. And also it gets you jobs. I mean, a lot of times you get hired just because of word of mouth. Somebody knows you and you get hired, and sometimes you don't even have to provide anything.
I mean,
it's the backing of the person.
It's kind of rare, right? And
sometimes
as you climb up more and more, it's rare that you have to like submit a resume and write a cover letter like you would in other industries. And that's, I think, what makes it such a tricky business to break into and to understand how it functions. It's almost like there's this veil over everything, and you only get to unlock those doors once you've been here long enough and you've been beaten enough by Hollywood that they're like, fine, you're still here. We'll tell you how we do it. That's sometimes how I feel it goes. But I think like for anyone who wants to be a producer, like, it really is just having a point of view. Certainly, I think, like, yes, do anything, but at a certain point you have to have like, who do you want to be? What projects, what stories do you want to put your energy and your time, which is your non-renewable resource, behind? Like, if you're just in a season of your career where you're like, I just need to learn as much as I can, I'll do literally anything and everything, great. But like, at some point you have to step back and go, you know what? I really love horror. I really want to focus on horror. I want to do horror. I want to help women in horror. And that's what I want to start focusing on, right? And then you can start to be known as a brand, as like, oh yeah, Tammy, that producer who's always supporting women in horror. Like, and then that's how you kind of build something for yourself. And certainly, yes, you can get caught in like putting boxes and whatnot, but at least you can carve a lane for yourself, in a business where there's just so many people like running that rat race towards the same direction. But that's why I say it's like, it's important to really, instead of just, you have to have that season of your life, of your career, where you're like, anything, I'll do anything for anybody, for any amount of money. But then you have to pull back and go, is this in alignment with where I want to go, with why I'm doing this, why I got into this in the first place? And then answer those questions honestly for yourself. If your goal is to just become a millionaire and make a shit ton of money, there's no shade in that. But then who's making those decisions? What are those career paths? Maybe it's not being this kind of producer. Maybe there's something else that you can do to reach that goal. But if your goal is to like discover new voices and filmmakers, like, just having that clarity as much as you can, I think helps get people on the path earlier so they can find their people. Because I think that's one of the big things. It's a huge industry, right? But the network is very small, because the amount of people that end up having longevity and are consistently working and have a good reputation, that pool is small, right? Compared to the whole.
Yeah.
And so if you can start to really identify how you want to navigate and what you're passionate about, you can start to meet those people for yourself a lot more quickly than if you go, wow, I always wanted to do comedy, but I blinked and I've spent 10 years in horror and I hate it. And it's like, okay, well, then you should have like taken a step back and pivoted into the thing you want to be doing, because you know what? No one's going to hand you that opportunity. No one's going to say, Tammy, oh my God, you're amazing with horror, but would you like to do a comedy? Because like, we just have the right thing for you. Like, that's never going to happen. You have to be entrepreneurial nowadays as a producer. You have to carve your own lane, find your own projects. everything is sort of fair game. A TikTok could be IP for something. You know what I mean? Like, so being really savvy about where you're looking for things that are going to make you unique in the marketplace, I think are sort of the name of the game.
Well, and that brings a good point of communication, and that is you have to communicate what you need and want, and don't expect people to just know, because nobody reads your mind.
Yeah.
And if your work, like you just said, if you're consistently working in horror but hate horror, nobody's going to know that because you're consistently working in horror. I'm kind of curious, as a producer, is there a certain type of networking that you do, like big producer networking events that you're like, oh yeah, I'm a part of this, I'm a part of that?
No, I think those are often futile. I do, because here's what happens.
Okay.
You go to those events, you introduce yourself to someone, they're not going to remember you. You know, the way you build those relationships is by having one-on-one conversations with people over usually a shared mutual thing that perhaps has nothing to do with the business. And that's why it takes years to build a network, and why the people that go work the agencies or go work at production companies from the jump, they come out ahead because they're at the epicenter of where all relationships are being formed. And when you start out as an assistant with other assistants, in 5 years, everyone you knew is now scattered throughout the industry, doing whatever it is that they're doing. And now you have, 30, 40 people in your network of people that you struggled with, right? So if you want to network, I think the best way to do it is have a year at a desk where you're really supporting an agent. And those are the hubs of information in our business. That to me is like the smartest thing you can do. And if I could go back, I would have done that just for a year to be like, I did that, check that off. But for me, because I didn't do that, and because I had chose, I don't know, maybe a harder path, I would just hustle. I went to film festivals. I would meet producers there. I would stay in touch. I would invite them to coffee. I would legit ask producers if I could shadow them. I would try to find a common thread, and I would be really specific. They're doing the kinds of movies I love. Like, it's not a blowing smoke up their butts. Like, these are people that are already creating the kind of work I want to be doing. I want to learn from them. So it's also like, you have to remember, like, you're not going to call up like Jerry Bruckheimer, be like, Jerry, I want to, like, he's never going to pay attention to you. He's like 8 million light years ahead of you. So who is to your left and to your right that you're going to rise together with? Network with those people. That'll be a more effective use of your time. And yes, have those people that are like, a couple steps ahead that you're like, oh, I also want to get to know them. There'll be a closer reach for you to tap on their shoulder, and they'll actually give you time of day because a couple years ago they were where you were. So there's a closer identification point, right? So I would say that's like the way to network, in my opinion. And then just doing the work. If you do the work and you go to a film festival and you produce the thing, people are going to want to talk to you because of the work, right? So if you just go to those networking events where people charge you to go to them sometimes, like, it's exhausting. No one likes them. I've never met a single person who's come out of there with a success story of like, and now we're doing this together. Like, it just depletes your energy. So I say, instead of networking like in this sort of like a what do you call those? A grenade approach, where it's just like everything, like throwing spaghetti at the wall. This is terrible metaphor. I don't like guns, but so it was like a shotgun approach, which is just terrible. I need to find a better one. But just have more intentionality. I want to do horror. I want to meet producers who work in horror. Where did those people go? Oh, they go to this like horror conference every year. Let me go there. Let me go be in rooms where they are, and let me meet those people of all levels. And that's how I think you can be really smart with your time and your money, because when you're starting out, all these things have a cost to them, whether it's financial or your time or your energy. But that's kind of what I did. I just pursued people that were doing work that I already responded to and tried to get meetings with them with very little degrees of success. And then honestly, the podcast was not the intention when I went into it, but it did become the best networking tool I could have ever imagined, because here I am reaching out to these people I admire and respect. I'm not pitching them anything. I'm not asking them for a job. I'm literally asking for an hour of their time to sit and hear their story. How often do people do that? And that is a lot more memorable than if I had met them at some random networking event and just talked them to death about the kinds of stuff I'm working on. You actually create a real bond with people. And it's like, I now have an incredible network of women and guests from the podcast who, not every single person, but a lot of people who I can tap into, and I can go, I'm struggling to understand how this works in like television. Oh, you know what? Let me call Yeah, let me call these three ladies on the show. Maybe they'll walk me through how this works, right? So I have this now because of the fact that I did this show. And again, I went in with a very specific intention of what I was after. And then my integrity and how I lead and how I am, I guess, spoke for itself. And those people were like, I want to stay in touch with her. She seems like she's cool, you know, not a weirdo. So that's how you build it. And I think everyone can find like their own authentic way of doing that is organic to who they are. So if you love dogs, go network at a dog park in LA and bond over dogs. You'll get much further than going to these like sort of industry events where everyone is just like, ugh, eye roll most of the time. Sorry to break it to everyone, but that's the reality.
Well, it's probably not break it. It's like, God, then they don't have to go. I mean, that was always so daunting for me is networking. I was like, oh, I'm such an introvert. I don't want to have to do this. And then
just that word networking. It's like, we're humans. It's about having a connection with someone based on something that's real. And the word networking is like, I am a robot. Here is my business card. We should do something together. It's just not memorable. People at the end of the day just want to have a genuine interaction with someone they like. And then if they like you, they continue to build a relationship. And then one day they go, I really like her. I want to work with her. It's that simple. But you don't get to that if you're just a robot version of yourself navigating these events, you know? So
yeah, I like that. And, with your podcast, Angle on Producers, I listened to and I loved it. I mean, I just love it. And all the guests that you have now, do you know these people or how do you how did you get these?
No.
So how did you get connected to some of the people on the show?
So yeah, there's a handful of people when I started that were like colleagues or coworkers or producers I knew, producers I admired. So I started with that. And then I would go, hey, is there someone in your network you think should be on the show? And then they would introduce me to people. Or I would say, hey, I saw that you actually did a movie with this person, blah, blah, blah. And I actually would love an intro to them. Do you feel comfortable making that intro so I could see if they'd be on the show? So it's that you plant a seed and then it starts to blossom from there. And then when I got enough traction, there is a gift and there is an art, I believe, to asking and to a cold outreach and a cold email. And so then I just went through and made my list of like, who are all the dream people I wish I could have on the show? And I started just reaching out to them. And I would say, I'm this person. I'm a working producer, just like you. And I'm doing this show for these reasons. And I think your story needs to be documented for these reasons. And I think everyone would love to hear your wisdom. Who's going to say no to that?
Right.
I mean, some people say no to that. Some people don't like being recorded. They don't want to. They really want to be behind the scenes. Some older school people for sure are like, oh, no, thank you. And I respect that. There's no problem with that at all. But I at least got to have the ask and I at least got to be in their inbox. And a lot of times they respond. So now my name has somewhat been seen by them. So if it ever comes across, they'll be like, well, how do I know that name? Oh, yeah, the girl with the podcast. Right. You know what I mean? Like this has happened to me so many times. But yeah, it's just really perfecting the art of the ask. And it just comes down to specificity and being honest with what you're saying. So if I'm reaching out to someone to be on the show, it's because I genuinely want them to come on the show. I genuinely think they're dope, that they've done incredible work, and I want to spend an hour with them. And if I approach it that way, I think they feel that energetically and they want to say yes, versus if I'm like, okay, there's like these 10 people that like should be on the show, but I don't really care about them. I can reach out. I may still get a yes, but it just won't vibe as much for me. And so why do it,
Yeah.
Especially when my time is so limited too.
Right. Yeah. No, I think it's amazing that when you ask so many people, end up saying yes. I mean, I know for my podcast too, it's like, this is my networking as well. So it's funny that you should say that because I was thinking, I didn't know it at the time, but I realized, oh my God, this is how I have an avenue in to talk to somebody. And number two is you just never, then I get to have this personal one-on-one conversation with them and I get to ask them all the questions that I'm curious about. And, and then hopefully maybe still stay in contact with them. I mean, you never know when you meet people. I've made a lot of friends off the show that, I thought, wow.
Yeah.
We should,
and I love
out.
that like you get to now. Yes. And I love that now you get to share this conversation with a bunch of someones who are going to find value in this as well. And so it's like, it benefits you. It benefits a ton of people who are listening. And it's just I think podcasting is such an incredible way to connect and meet people. And there's been so many conversations I've had in my life where I'm like, oh, I wish I was recording to share this with other people because this is some incredible advice, or what an incredible story that, only exists here in this moment in time. And I was having a lot of those talks off mic with producer friends over a lot of wine. And that's when I was like, oh, someone just reached out to me asking me these very same questions. Like, I wish I could just record you and us in dialogue because it answers their question. And that was kind of what the genesis of the show was just like wanting to share the information with others.
Yeah, well, kudos for you to do your own show. And now, are you doing all the production of it? Because it's a lot of work. So
it's a lot of work. Yeah, it's a lot of work. I am trying to elevate the show. I'm trying to raise money from brands or sponsors. If anyone listening is interested in supporting a Latina-led show, let me know. Hit me up. But yeah, that's been the challenge, is that I've been doing it truly as labor of love, mostly on my own. I've had pockets where I've had people volunteer and support me. Like recently, I've had this wonderful young lady who reached out because she was trying to break into the business and was like, can I support you in some way? And I was like, well, I could use help with these things on the podcast. And she's become like an invaluable right hand to me as she's breaking into the business. And I've like mentored her as an exchange. But yeah, I've had women who've come through and helped me in different parts of the process, but generally it's been me by myself, and I'm trying to change that. But I need, funding to be able to hire some people to support me in the right way so I can keep the show going.
Yeah. Well, you'll get there. I have no doubt of that.
Thanks.
So I was just curious, do you look for films that you want to produce, or at this time, or do you get people pitching their films for you to produce?
I am, a little bit of both. I'm constantly reading scripts. I'm looking at what's out there. I'm also very intentional and mindful of what I say yes to and where I put my time, because when it comes to projects that come to you that are great, but they're not packaged, they're not financed, they are a long uphill battle. They take years and years and years for a variety of reasons that are outside of anyone's control sometimes. And so saying yes to something is like, am I down to potentially be a part of this for the next 5 years of my life and not get paid for it, right? That's the other part that people don't know. Producers typically only get paid once a project goes into production, and think about the amount of work that happens until production comes. So you have to really feel like you want to be a part of that. Like it's like a little marriage almost, So I'm really mindful of what I say yes to. Now, certainly there are projects that people reach out to me and say, hey, we have this thing, it's financed, we're looking for a producer to come help us with production. Do you want to come do it? And then it's just a matter of like, all right, do I like the script? How's the money? Like, who are the people? Who are the players? And then it just kind of goes from there. But I'm certainly always looking, and I'm also really focused in this season of my career supporting a lot more Latinos and my people specifically. I've done a lot of incredible work uplifting women and people of color, which I have loved, but there's such a dire need in Hollywood to support our community. And if we don't do it ourselves, like no one's really going to do it for us. So I have a keener interest in those stories and meeting those kinds of writers and directors and producers and just those people in our business at this moment, in looking for those stories that I can help get into production and get them made.
So how would you like someone to pitch their movie to you? Do you have some tips on, if you're going to bring a movie to a producer, have your ducks in the row, or, what would you like? Yeah.
One thing I will say to not do is don't message someone on LinkedIn. Don't send them a cold email pitching them your project, because they don't know you. And it's also like there's a lot of protection for copyright with your project. So when you're sending unsolicited materials, sometimes it's really tricky because it's hard to look at things without, making sure that you're protecting that person's copyright. That's why a lot of companies have this policy, and a lot of people won't look at materials unless it comes through a lawyer or an agent. And there's also the aspect of like relationships, right? A lot of people write things, and not all those things are very good or are ready for production or are ready to go be, the scripts take a long time to get into a place where you can take it out to cast, where you can really get behind it. So I think that you have to first really have taken it out to your community, the project, and made sure, like, is this the best possible script that you have? What other elements can you bring? Are you the writer director, or are you just writing it? Are you going to need a director as well? Do you have director ideas that you're bringing into the fold? What are you looking for in a producer? Do you just need someone to do a budget for you? Or are you looking for a ride or die partner who's going to come and be, like I said, that creative producer who starts with the project and is with it till its death, however long that lasts. So I think getting, again, intentional and specific about what you want out of that relationship, and then making sure that you are approaching it the right way. Like oftentimes, if you don't have someone who's going to introduce you and make that connection, it is harder, because it's hard to be pitched something that it comes from someone you don't know, because again, the volume of stuff is so crazy that it's hard to look at everything all the time. So those projects will always go to the bottom of the list. And there are gems in there, but it's really hard to sort through all of those kinds of requests to look at material, especially when you're someone like me, who I don't have an assistant. It's just me navigating all the things. So yeah, I would say that those are the steps I would take. I would make sure that, like, if you're reaching out to a producer to read your material, you have a really clear understanding of what it is that you're looking for them to do on that project. Because let's just say, produce my project. Again, we just had a whole hour conversation about how that could mean a lot of different things. So getting really specific, and then why that person? Why that person? What have they done that makes you feel like this is right for them? What are they doing that makes you feel like that's right for them? This is where I would do my homework. If that producer is someone who is very public, maybe they just did a podcast recently where they said, oh my God, you know what I've never gotten to do that I love, but no one ever sends me? It's blah, blah, blah. And then you do your homework, and then you reach out to that producer and you said, hey, Carolina, I heard you on the show talking about how your life's dream is to do a revival of this musical, and I have something that could be really interesting for you. That's going to pique my interest. That's someone who did their homework, who's listening, right? Smart, a hustler. Not someone who's just sending me something because it's a Latina-led thing that they think I'll like just because it's got a Latina at the front and center, So that's what I would say. Again, it's a lot of legwork on the front end, but if you do it right, you get better and faster results versus anybody, anything, anywhere. It's like, well, then that's what you're going to get back. If you put out generalized things, you're going to get generalized responses, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Could you share the typical range that a producer can make? Like, if producers are out there and they're wondering, well, how much do producers make? Like, what is the range of a starting person to somebody that's more experienced?
Do you mean in terms of like what they can make in one project? Is it in an independent
like
project?
An independent
Is it a producer
film?
who?
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it depends on the budget of that film. That's why it's impossible to scale, because it's like, if I have $10 million to make a movie, well, then you do the math, and it's always a creative mathematical equation that there's no formula to it. I can say, well, my fee is $500,000. Okay, but then like that's money we can't use for this, and now there's 3 producers and they all want equal fees. So you're telling me that you have $10 million, you're going to pay your producers $1.5 million, and it's going to compromise the creative? That doesn't quite make sense. Now, if I have $100 million or $40 million and my fee is $1 million, all right, proportionate-ish, depending on what the story is and my precedent and all the things. But that's why in the indie space, like it's impossible to answer that question, but it can be honestly as low as like $30,000 sometimes of a flat fee that you're making for that project. And if you're the person who put that together, you've worked on this for years, and now you're getting $30,000, and that's all you'll ever see, because yes, you hope you have back end, and yes, you hope you sell it in the marketplace, but look at what's happening across theatrical. Those kinds of stories are fewer and far between, and that's why there's this huge movement of, well, I'm going to get as much money as I can up front, because this is probably all I'll make on this project. And that's why people can come in with pretty high fees, but it just depends. So if I'm a producer and I bring this to, trying to think of a producer, say I bring this to Lynette Howe-Taylor, who is an incredible producer who's been on the podcast, and I say, Lynette, I want you to do this movie with me. She's going to be like, great, my minimum fee is X. And now I go, great, I have Lynette. She brings all this value. She's an incredible producer. She's won Oscars. Like, she knows a bunch of talent. But the cost of those relationships, the cost of her skills are, say, $300,000. How am I going to move money around to make that happen? I guess I got to get rid of some of my fee to bring her on. So that's kind of how those conversations go. It depends on who's putting the project and who's leading those conversations. That's why it's super impossible to say. But one thing I know is that a lot of producers, frankly, take years before they're actually making a living off of solely just producing. A lot of people are doing commercials on the side, you know what I mean, to make a living while setting up their indie projects with the hope that it becomes the lightning in a bottle. So if you are looking for that path, that's why a lot of people will go more of the route where you're working production. Like you can come up working as a production coordinator to then a supervisor, a UPM, line producer, and then eventually you could go to become a producer because you're learning, right? You're making connections, but you're getting paid at the same time. You're not just out there grinding it out, trying to raise money for your indie like everybody else. It's just a different type of lifestyle. Some people have the stomach for it, some don't. So yeah, that's why it varies so greatly. But it is quite customary, unfortunately, on the indie side for people to work for quite a bit of time before they reach a point where they're making fees that can actually sustain a life.
So then you really juggle multiple projects then. You can't just solely do one for that.
Yeah. No, you can't. I mean, you are constantly having multiple balls in the air. Again, multitasking, being organized, leading a bunch of projects. It's important to have a producing partner because on days where you don't feel like it, on days where you're sick, on weeks where you just want to get away and run to the hills because this business is so hard. If you have no one else to throw the ball to, well, now you've just lost 3-4 weeks of progress on your project because you didn't feel like doing it, right? And I've never had a proper producing partner, and I speak literally from experience with that it is harder when you are doing it on your own. But sometimes that's how you start. But if you're lucky enough to have someone who's on that journey with you, it makes it just a bit more enjoyable to celebrate the wins and to commiserate in the losses too.
Yeah. So is there anything that you'd like to end with, share? Any last thoughts?
Yeah, I'll say this, like it is a difficult career path, but there's a lot of beauty and reward in it, you know, and you have to really understand why it is that you want to do the thing in the first place. I think that's the most important, the why. You have to figure out your why because it is full of challenges and the highs are very high, but the lows are very low, you know? So for anyone who's, you know, thinking about it, I encourage them to definitely pursue it, but just to be realistic and mindful of like what it means to navigate that path, to really make sure they understand that you're not going to be a producer and make a ton of money right away because that's not how it works for most people. You just have to climb the ranks like everybody else, but that if you love story and you love supporting storytellers across whatever landscape that looks like for you, you can have a very rewarding career being an artist and helping, you know, bring stories to life. And I do think that as hard as it is such a privilege that we get to do this and get to tell stories and get to help bring stories to life that can change conversations, change policies even. I think that's the power of what we do. It's like sort of silly because we're not saving lives. We say that all the time. We're not curing cancer, but we help a lot of people navigate some really difficult things, you know, in their life. Maybe people that are going through cancer treatments, that are thinking about ending their lives. Like, stories matter and they always will. And I think while we have TikToks and we have a lot of exciting, you know, short form content out there, I really don't think it'll ever fully replace our human need for connection and to feel seen and understood and heard through the power of story. That's really what connects us at the end of the day. So, you know, I don't mean to be doom and gloom by any means. I just don't want to mislead anyone into thinking it's a path of sunshine and roses where you're hanging out with celebrities at red carpets drinking champagne. You know, that happens 1% of the time and it's so fun when it does, but make sure you're in it for the right reasons.
Yeah, you really got to love it.
And yeah, you really got to love it. And, you know, for people who are, I'll just plug the show again, interested in learning more, Angle on Producers, that's the show. You can find it on any of your anywhere where you get your podcasts, you know, and I'm pretty Googleable. I'm at Carolina Groppa on the socials. The show's at Angle on Producers. And yeah, if you end up tuning in, please subscribe. If you do, let me know what you think. And share the show with people because it's like a labor of love and it's why I do it. So,
well, thank you so much for being on the show today. This was great.
Thank you so much for having me, Tammy. Thank you. I hope I got to enlightened some people.
You sure did. Thank you so much for listening. I encourage you to get out there and make a film. Reach out to your local filmmakers group to get involved and connect. Please subscribe to the show if you like it, and follow me on Instagram at Tammy Magaro. Until we meet again, what's your story?